Okay, welcome to the third part of this review where we'll discuss the Linkwitz Lab LX521 sound characteristics. And I think one of the first things we should talk about is the way that these loudspeakers interact with the room. And that, I feel, is one of the unique features of these loudspeakers over anything with a box. So anything that has a box behind the driver sounds different in a room than these do. And they have a way of making the room disappear more than almost any other loudspeaker I've ever heard. And that is very much by design. Siegfried Linkwitz designed these to do exactly that. He was always studying ways not just to make the loudspeaker sound better, but the way the loudspeaker interacts with the room and how to make that better. And so his solution was basically a dipole with very even dispersion throughout its whole frequency range. And he did that through the baffle shape and through the active crossover. And those two elements help to make that even dispersion. And so when you're sitting in that chair, you get very little information on the room that you're in. It's more about the space that the recording was done. And you get a sense of that space through these loudspeakers in ways that box speakers just can't do. So let's go over the bass mid-range treble, as most reviews do. So the bass in these is probably one of their strongest suits, and I'm not just talking about extension, which the extension's quite good. I mean, it's not like super subwoofer level 18 hertz, rattle your teeth kind of bass. But I would say, without doing any frequency measurements, my gut tells me that you're into the high 20s with these loudspeakers with plenty of visceral punch. But the unique part of the bass in this instance is it has a very unique way of loading the room. And that is there's a certain way that box speakers pressurize a room. And you can kind of feel it, the air pressure in your eardrums, right? Like in your inner ear, you can feel that pressure. And what these do is you hear the bass notes, but you don't feel that air pressure in the same way. And that is not a detriment. I mean, that is actually a really good thing. And it makes it feel more real, more like a bass instrument does in a room. It doesn't pressurize your ear the way like a sealed subwoofer just pumps, all this air pressure into your room. These have a very natural way of reproducing the bass with very little overhang, right? So when you have a dipole, you don't need to have such a massive rigid box, because you're letting that back wave come out of there. And think about how much money is spent on cabinetry to absorb and control the back wave of many of these loudspeakers. And that's where all the cost is basically going to. All these cabinets with labyrinths inside them and built of slate, or there's some kind of resin material or carbon fiber or all aluminum. All that stuff costs big money, and what you're trying to do is get rid of that back wave. Why not just let it come out? These are proof positive that is a strategy that can work. And it's amazing when you start to listen to these, and then you go back to a box speaker. All you can hear is box. You hear the box colorations all the time. And I think probably many Maggie owners would also agree that once you go from a Magnepan, which is also a dipole, by the way, albeit through very different means, that lack of a box, it's hard to go back to a box speaker once you live with a dipole, and that back wave is just allowed to get out. The mid-range, which is split between these two drivers, the lower and upper mid-range, is very seamless. You cannot get a sense that there's any kind of crossover happening between these two guys. That mid-range is very fleshy, very warm, and I will say though that if you are a person who likes a mid-range that's kind of lit up, I have a friend of mine who has Cube Audio Nenufars, and they're a single driver speaker, and that mid-range is just highlighted, right? It is out there, and it is a major focus of that loudspeaker. And if you prefer that sound, you may feel that these are perhaps a mite bit recessed in the mid-range. For me and myself, it doesn't bother me at all. And that sort of lit up mid-range feels artificial to me in a little bit. Would I prefer it to be a mite less recessed in the mid-range? Yeah, I think there's some improvement that could happen there. And it may just be a voicing preference by Siegfried himself. I'm not totally sure. I mean, you have a lot of control when you have an active crossover about equalization and things. So it may have been just a conscious decision and a listening preference on his part. I'm not sure. I'm curious to know if I ever do fixed or replace this upper mid-range with the new driver, if that would alleviate some of that recessed mid-range that I hear. The treble is also one of those things that's not spotlit. So if those super tinkly, extended highs that even can be a little hot, if you like that, these may not be for you, because they don't tilt up that top end at all. They're very even in that way, and I think they have, the loudspeaker in general has a more warm tonality than some of the high-end speakers that you see in shops and things that I feel like maybe overhype the detail. They overhype they overhype the highs, and once you get them in your room and you start listening to them, you find you listen less and less, and they start to bother you over time. I've had these for 6 years, and I'm always excited to come down here and play a new piece of music on them, right? Like, find a new piece and I come down here and I just, I can't wait to hear what they sound like on these. So, one of the things that Linkwitz always talked about is when you have a dipole and you have in phase in this direction, out of phase in this direction, when those two phases come around to this side, they cancel each other out. And Linkwitz always wanted this setup in a room for this plane of the loudspeaker to basically point at the first reflection spot. And that, in his mind, you would have very little sound, direct sound, that would be radiating from the first reflection back to the listening chair. And I tried that, and I have to be honest, it has nothing to do with the sound. I didn't like the way it looked. It would create extreme toe-in on the upper baffle. And so they would be crossing 2-3 feet in front of my listening chair, and it looked strange to me. And so in the end, it's odd, but in the end what I did was basically toe them in the same as getting the bass drivers right, and then I added some absorption on the first reflection. And so this baffle is pointing probably a foot in front of the absorption panel that's on the side here. And it's nothing more than my preference for how it looks visually. There was no, and that's the whole point of having this wide dispersion, is that you can do that kind of an extreme toe-in, and you're still getting the same frequency response at the listening chair because of the even dispersion. So now I want to talk about some sound staging, which is another real strong point of this loudspeaker, and then give you an example of that. So the sound staging is pretty phenomenal. You get an amazing sense of the recording venue itself, and you get some great images within that soundstage. They are not the type of images that are etched with very distinct boundaries. They're a little more diffuse, but I feel that that's more natural than something that either has this weird kind of etched boundary, or it sounds like it's coming from a infinite black hole point in space, which is a little unnatural to me. But they also have this incredible way of making sound appear outside of the loudspeaker. And I want to give you an example of that. So this is a record that I bought a while ago, The Wonderful Sounds of Male Vocals. And this is, Quality Record Pressings recording. It's basically a compilation of all sorts of male vocals that have been on other albums. And so there's one I want to highlight in particular, and when we do the clip of it, I'll put the actual first album that it was on if you don't have this. But basically this is a Pete Seeger song, but it's from the Weavers reunion at Carnegie Hall in 1963. And what I want you to listen to is this recording's a little bit odd because Pete Seeger is all the way to the right. And when I sit at my listening chair, Pete Seeger is 2 feet outside of the right loudspeaker. That's where he's placed in my listening room. And when you hear, he's basically just singing alone, and then he gets the crowd to sing in with him. And once that crowd comes in, you get a real sense of the size of that venue. And so I want you guys to listen on your own systems and tell me if that occurs in your system. Is Pete 2 feet to the right of your loudspeaker, or somewhere else outside of that boundary, or is it somewhat inside? And can you hear that venue when the crowd starts coming in? I'm curious to know. So leave me a comment and let me know how it sounds on your system, because maybe this happens on everyone's system, and it's not a strong suit of these. I'm curious to know.
So fare ye well, my rambling boy. May all your rambles bring you joy. So fare ye well, my rambling boy. May all your rambles bring you joy. He was a man and a friend always. We rambled round in the hard old days. He never cared if I had no dough. We rambled round in the rain and snow. Now y'all sing. Fare ye well, my rambling boy. May all your rambles bring you joy. May all your rambles bring you joy. Try it again. Fare ye well, my rambling boy. May all your rambles bring you joy.
The next example I'd like to give is an example of timbre and how accurate the timbre is on these as well. So the Kings of Convenience are a Norwegian duo that I think I featured on at least one other video. But these are two Norwegians, and basically it's just them and acoustic guitars and some sparse instruments on occasion. But if you listen to the first song on this album, you'll see that each of these guys have a voice that is very close in timbre. And when you have a system that's maybe not so great, you can't tell the difference between the two of them. And they sound the same. What this loudspeaker does is allow you to easily tell who is who, and that they have their own distinct spots on the soundstage.
Hey baby, Mrs. Cole, acting so tough, didn't know you had any to be hurt at all. You waited too long, you should have hooked me before I put my raincoat on. Okay, I get it, okay, I see. You were fronting because you knew you'd find yourself vulnerable around me. Okay, I get it, okay, I see. You feel vulnerable around me.
And finally, I wanted to go over instrument separation. And as an example of that, there's this album by Anne Brun, who's also Scandinavian, I believe. I don't know why I'm into Scandinavians, but so this song is a fabulous song. There's a couple things that I listen for on this song, and one is that there's a deep bass drum that's really hitting pretty hard. You probably won't be able to hear that on my recording, but it is there. And then the other thing is her voice is front and center, But then there are these moments where there are these background singers that come in, and they should be distinct from her voice and from the instruments. And there is a moment where she is singing and they're singing and the instruments are going all at the same time. And those should all be distinct in the soundstage. And that's what I hear with these.
I know you, and I see what you're going through. Let your brave heart grow stronger than the pain that makes you lose your way. A single spark shot from your eyes can light the sky like fireflies. A gentle wind of gratitude purifies a clouded mind. You cling to
So, overall, I think what you're getting with this as a system is pretty amazing for the DIY nature of it, the cost of it. It's not cheap. Even the DIY version, you're going to be, including amplification, you're going to be north of $6,000 to make these easily. But I have to say that in visiting a lot of dealers and a lot of other people's systems, there's only one now that I've heard that I thought was superior to in every way to these, and that was another open baffle design by Songer Audio, who's out of Portland here, and he hand makes his own electromagnetic driver with a monster 15-inch open baffle bass driver underneath it, and those had that kind of mid-range resolution and refinement that's maybe missing here, but those cost $55,000. And those are the only ones I've heard so far. I have not heard a lot of the uber high-end stuff. I have no chance of affording it, so it doesn't hold a ton of interest for me. But I'm hoping to go to the Pacific Audio Fest next June, and I will hopefully get to hear some of the uber high-end stuff and see, how much money does it take to beat these? Because right now, it takes a whole lot. And in that way, they're sort of an end game for me, because I just can't afford $55K. And that's why they've been here for 6 years. I've listened to these almost every day, and I can tell you that they don't get old. They really don't. And that, to me, is a rarity in loudspeakers these days. I don't feel the need to replace these. That's the review. Thanks, guys.
I could barely see. I could barely see.